Joe, the undefeated pride of Wales, reigned supreme for 11 years with 21 title defences, blending skill, intelligence, and adaptability. From outlasting Eubank to dismantling Lacey and outsmarting Kessler, he solved every puzzle in front of him. Battling hand injuries, he evolved into a dazzling volume puncher, overwhelming foes with rhythm like jazz. Praised by legends and feared by rivals, his legacy sparks debate. Is Joe, alongside Lennox Lewis, the greatest British fighter ever?
Joe Calzaghe was the undefeated pride of Wales. And I think people really don't give Joe Calzaghe the flowers he deserves. I mean, he was undefeated. He was a world champion. And he had a domination period, I believe, of over 11 years. 21 defenses. I think it speaks for itself. His victory over Eubank showed that he was a warrior. Because when it got tough, Calzaghe got going. And Eubank pulled him into the jungle. He gave him, I believe Calzaghe said it was his hardest fight. But he showed what he was made of. And his victory over Lacey was dominant. We have to remember the context. We have to remember the context of this fight. Lacey was a rising star. He was the overwhelming favorite. And Calzaghe not only destroyed Lacey, he possibly destroyed his whole career. And the one thing that Calzaghe had, he had a lot, but he had superior boxing intelligence. He made the adjustments. He made adjustments against Kessler. He stayed in the pocket. He got hit with that hard right uppercut, I believe in round 4. But then he decided to come out of the pocket and pick him off with the punches. He used his volume punching and angles and made it an outside fight. He solved the puzzle. He solved every puzzle. His boxing, in a sense, figuratively speaking, was like jazz. He could change his rhythm. He could adapt. And let's not forget that Joe Calzaghe actually had hand issues. He had hand issues. And I think this was an incredible part about his style. He adapted his style to be able to continue his career. Because Calzaghe at the beginning of his career used to sit on his punches, used to put power into his punches. But then he evolved into a volume puncher as opposed to punching with authority. This was an important part of his evolution because of his hand issues, he wasn't able to maintain his previous style. So he changed his style and made it even more effective. And many people, as I've stated that some people don't give Calzaghe his due credit, but there are many people that do give him his credit. I mean, this was like a backhanded compliment from Kessler, but he said his punches weren't particularly hard, but it was confusing when he hit you 20 times. Indeed, Joe Calzaghe was such a volume puncher. Sugar Ray Leonard, the great Sugar Ray Leonard, what an amazing fighter he was. He stated within 2 rounds, I was a Calzaghe supporter, and he was referring to that Jeff Lacey fight. And Carl Froch, who was kind of like a nemesis of Joe Calzaghe, even though they didn't fight, stated that he believed that Calzaghe could have beaten Ward. And Andre Ward, again, was another elite fighter who was undefeated. And in a way, there were many fights with Calzaghe that didn't happen that you wish did happen. For example, I think the Carl Froch fight would have been a great fight. Carl Froch is a phenomenal puncher, and Joe Calzaghe is a phenomenal boxer, a southpaw. The volume punching against the power would have been a great fight, but it also would have been a great event. Also, it would be interesting, and this fight couldn't happen because they came at slightly different times. But what would how would Joe Calzaghe have fared, or what would the fight look like against the prime Sergey Kovalev? And when I say Sergey Kovalev, I mean the prime Sergey Kovalev. I'm talking about the Sergey Kovalev that was obliterating everyone. The one that, totally destroyed Nathan Cleverly, respectively. The one who had that dominant reign that was scoring knockouts with jabs to the body. That would have been a really good fight. That would have been a really good event. And even though Joe Calzaghe beat Roy Jones, even though he beat Bernard Hopkins, some people, the skeptics, say he needed to be a prime Roy Jones and a prime Bernard Hopkins to really elevate his career. And I can understand that perspective. I'm not sure I agree, but I can understand it. But even with that being said, you could ask the question, is Joe Calzaghe the greatest British fighter of all time? Is he the greatest British boxer of all time? And I think many would say yes to that question. Of course, I would say that he's neck and neck with Lennox Lewis. And of course, Lennox Lewis had a phenomenal career. Lennox Lewis was a phenomenal talent. And he had he was dominant in the heavyweight division. And a lot of people didn't want to fight Lennox Lewis. But you have to give Joe Calzaghe his just due. You have to give him his credit. I believe at the beginning of his career, there was this prevailing belief that he was a protected fighter. And that myth, I think, really hurt his career. But I feel like that is a misconception, especially when he took the Jeff Lacey fight, because the Jeff Lacey fight was at the time a dangerous fight. Of course, in hindsight, we could say, Jeff Lacey wasn't that good. But at the time, he was the rising star. And Joe Calzaghe, like a warrior, took the risk. He took the fight. And he didn't only win the fight, he won the fight convincingly. Kessler was another dangerous opponent, very dangerous opponent. He took the fight, he stayed too long in the pocket, he got hurt, and he came back. The Eubank fight was a dangerous fight to take at the time because of Eubank's championship credibility and his championship level experience. So you got to give him his flowers. And even, Bernard Hopkins is one of those unique fighters that had a successful second career. And even after he lost to Calzaghe, he still had some good wins. So even though you could argue it wasn't a prime Bernard Hopkins, it was still a good Bernard Hopkins. It was still an experienced Bernard Hopkins. It was still a capable Bernard Hopkins. And that, I think, was a very difficult puzzle to solve. And Bernard Hopkins presented a high level of difficulty. That was a fight that consisted of high ring IQ. But Joe Calzaghe, he solved the puzzle. He always solved the puzzle. And he definitely deserves an amazing amount of respect, because I think Joe Calzaghe, arguably the best British fighter of all time. Again, it's neck and neck with Lennox Lewis. But one thing we have to say is that Joe Calzaghe was an elite level fighter. He was an elite level boxer.